Hi, I am Elizabeth Sorelli. I'm here to welcome Peter Panagore, who had a near-death experience while ice climbing. So thank you, Peter, for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Liz. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So Peter is the author of Heaven is Beautiful, a wonderful, amazing book of his account through his near-death experience. And I know many of you have heard Peter's story several times. So I'm just going to read a quick little description of his near-death experience from his book to share that with you, and then we can move into lots of other questions that maybe you haven't heard Peter speak to in the past. So if that's okay with you, Peter.
Oh, yeah. Great. Thank you.
Sure. So as you were getting pulled onto the other side, you said, "The power plucked me. It plucked the real me, the whole me, the holy, whole soul me. Until that moment, I had never fully understand the soul of me, the who, what, why that are the real whole of me. I had thought that I was body and soul. Suddenly, I knew that this was not the case. I was only soul. My body was simply where I had dwelled. I suddenly, fully, completely knew that what I was, what I am, who I am, and what I will be forever and eternally is soul. Soul was me, soul is me. My body was not me, it had never been me. My body housed my soul, and when I was plucked from my flesh, it was still me. This is the hardest part of my story to write because nothing I will say from here on out can be verified, quantified, or qualified. Why? Because on the other side, I had no body, no brain, no blood, no bones, no eyes, no fingers, no toes, no culture, no language, no anything that is a thing in this world. Without a brain, there is no language. Without language, how can one say what one saw or what one heard or felt? I could see but had no eyes. Or maybe I had 10,000 eyes because I could see in every direction all at once. I could hear when spoken to, but I had no ears. Furthermore, there was no voice or sound, yet I could hear. So very interesting, Peter. Thank you for sharing that. It is a very interesting description and something that I think, is so difficult for all of us who haven't had a near-death experience to understand, but it was really beautifully written.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm bringing you back on, Peter. Peter had come on the show about a month ago, and I just still had so many questions for him. So I guess, we can maybe start with the contracts that we make as we're right before we're coming into this world. And maybe, Peter, can you speak to just a little bit about how those contracts are developed for us?
Well, I have something that wasn't in the book, and that is my first mystical experience as a 5-year-old when I was taken from my body in a similar way, but still attached to my body. I was taken by an angelic, intelligent being and carried up the silver cord to give it language and into the void. And inside of that space, inside of this protective shell of this angelic being, I understood that I had a pre-birth plan that I had agreed to. And I could see my little boy self down in the maple tree where I was seated. And I knew that I wasn't that little boy. So when I wrote in the book that description, that was built upon this experience, but I didn't feel safe in coming out as a mystical experiencer when I wrote a book on near death, because it was safer to be a near death experiencer. So I never talked about my pre birth. Pardon? Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you describe yourself going up the silver line, like what was did that just kind of just randomly happen, or was there an
I,
incident,
I
or
was sitting in the maple tree. So my brother and sister went to pardon me, my brother and sister, my two older sisters went to Catholic school, and I was waiting for them to get off the bus. I was in kindergarten in the morning class, and so I was going to scare them. So I climbed up the maple tree to jump down on them. But as I sat there in the tree, all the leaves were flipping back and forth, green, these two-tone greens, and I got mesmerized. I got mesmerized, and I felt myself expand and float. And as I into this state of I don't know what else to call it, but other than mesmerization, this angelic being rushed down completely unexpected and unannounced. And there was this roar behind me, the sound of Niagara Falls, and it took me. It took me, and it brought me up this shaft, and I could see the tree below me, and the house below me, and the where I lived, and up to the edge of the atmosphere. At which point, the atmosphere became this darkness, and this. I was inside this angelic being. I described this in the book. That wasn't my first trip inside the angelic being. The and when I was in this angelic being, I was inside of this infinite darkness, and then the being opened, and I got pulled outside of into the darkness itself. And when I was in the darkness itself, I experienced the eternal nature of it, its long existence, and its uh, comfort. I was at ease in this, and then I was put back into the angelic form, and then the darkness came into the space I was in and reshaped itself 10,000 times with all these colors and forms, and spoke to me directly without language. Again, I'm not have a physical body. I have a body of what I would describe as light. But the language was being spoken to me. Remember that we have a deal that you agreed to before you went down there. You work for me.
mm,
And I remember thinking, oh yeah, right. I'd forgotten I do work for you. And then poof, back down I went, back into that little body again. And things happened. I could tell you the whole story, but I'd rather talk about pre-birth plan. So then the second time, so I had this pre-birth plan. I didn't know what the mission was other than I worked for the divine. What that meant,
mm,
I made up an idea because I was a 5-year-old kid. I went to Catholic church and Greek church, and I told my mother I was going to be a priest. But that really was just an idea. It's like, oh, that's what it must mean. But
mm,
after when I was in my near death experience, I I had this point at which I made a choice to come back, and then that choice created the timeline for all the people around me.
mm.
Because had I not come back, they would have lived different lives. Everybody.
Yep.
And because I came back, they lived the lives that they've lived. And so at that point, this is one way to think about it. There was a timeline split. And so then I have to ask the question, what will happen to their plans, their life plans? Where did that go? How did that work? And so on the way out, so I make this choice, this thing splits. I'm being carried back down into my body. And in front of me are these 10,000 doorways, or 1 million doorways. I don't count them. And they all led into tunnels. And in the center of all of them was this big beam of light that I could see. I could see the origin of it coming from the infinite, but I couldn't see into the darkness anymore. And the entity that was carrying me, this, which was also the divine itself. So this angelic being is also like a reduction of the divine, superposition, and it orders me to choose, and it says choose light, and there's this big beam of white light, and then there's all these doors, and as the doors fade off to this high edge, and they're in this big circle of so many doors, the light fades further out the further you go. And I was encouraged to choose the light. I wanted to choose the light, but I didn't choose the fullness of the light. I chose some humanity. I chose some flaw. I chose some being humanness. And then the door opened and I went down this tunnel. And down this tunnel, there were 10,000 doors inside this tunnel. And all of these doors led to other tunnels. But I got to the end of my tunnel and then I was put back in my body again. And I tell you all of that because one of the after effects of my first NDE is that I live above myself.
Mhm.
I see myself doing things from a disassociative state, and I seem to see it just before it happens, not an hour before, not a day before, but just before it happens. I witness myself being in the world, and so there's this division place where I made this choice. There's all these doorways inside this tunnel, which are choices. And so as I've thought about this over the decades, I couldn't understand this experience of constantly having deja vu because this witnessing self came along with this. Oh, this has happened to me before. This has happened to me before. This has already happened to me. That's a better way to say it. This has already happened to me. But I know that I've made all these choices. And I know all the people around me have been making all these choices. 7 billion people or 8 billion people on earth making choices. And some of them are impacting us, whether we like it or not. And so that we're being redirected on our path all the time. And so as I thought about this for decades, I couldn't explain it to myself. Why am I always, how is it possible that if timelines diverge, that I'm always feeling like this meant to be? And then one day I understood that that's not the way it works. These doorways, these million doorways, they were all probabilities, all in the plan, but they're just not the path that I walked. And not only that, just one of them was the path I walked, but that's not true either. It's the one I chose. What's more to the truth is that I've walked on a whole bunch of them. I've made all these different choices and all these impacts have come to me. And so my pre-birth plan isn't so much what happens to me in the next moment or talking to you. My pre-birth plan is to lean myself toward the light and to lean because I knew immediately when I came into my body that I'd made a mistake. I should have stayed where I was. And later, as I thought about it, I might have been better off had I chosen the pure light and not taken off on one of the side routes.
So I'm wondering what made you, if you even know, to choose more of the humanness and not the total light? Do you know? Did you have insight to that?
I did have an idea why I did that. And I remember thinking it at the time. And so when I'm thinking this thing, I don't have a brain yet. All right. I'm what I could say is densifying. I'm like maple syrup that's been on the pot, boil and boil and boil. And it gets, I'm getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And I remember thinking that if I was going to be a messenger, then I had to be approachable. And to be approachable, I had to be human. And to be human, I had to have flaws. I had to be me. I couldn't be something other than that. I had to be. I was working. I was working a lot in construction when I was through college, and so I hung around with a lot of guys who were blue collar guys on a regular basis, and I remember thinking, how am I ever going to talk to somebody like that
Mm.
if I'm who how am I going to communicate with a person who's because even at this point I was like super literary. I was like reading all the time and studying literature and how was I going to talk to these guys if they couldn't relate to me? How are they going to relate to me? I had to be like them.
Yeah. Step into their world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I immediately regretted it.
What are the regrets?
uh I coming back, just coming back. And I know that that's hard for people to hear, but or it can be, but this is I've come to call this place the beautiful hellscape because it is beautiful and there's a lot of beauty in it, but
Mm.
suffering is a dominant feature here. And
Yeah.
so when people ask what's my purpose in life, what's my purpose in life? I can only answer for myself that the more, no matter the choices that I make and whatever happens to me in my life, good and bad and in between, the more often I lean toward the light in my regular daily life, the more my decisions, right or wrong, uh, lead me to the light itself, because the decisions are still on the surface level. And if I begin to operate from a much deeper space inside myself, then that's the the basis of all of my orientation. So I tend to work much more deeply in here in order so that even when I make mistakes in the world, it all is part of the plan.
Yeah.
It's all, and it all works out in the end anyway. And that's, I guess that's the end of the game, is that when the game's over and you've played your part, you leave your body. I left my body and I became what I've always been, which was beloved.
Beautiful. Well, I mean, I'm glad that you chose mostly light, right? But we do have people that come into this world that are aggressive and abusive and wreaking chaos and havoc. And so, is that a birth plan or a soul contract that God is condoning or approving? And how does, if God is all loving, allow us to choose so much darkness entering our plan into this world?
Well, part of that statement is the assumption that you're a human being in the first place. In the first place, you're not a human being. In the first place, you are the God. You are made of the substance of the divine being. And in the Bible, they talk about it from the image, an image from an image. In my experience, I was a singular photon superpositioned with a field of an infinite field of photons. And that infinite field comprised the them with a capital T and the one with a capital O. And I was a part of it, but separated from it. So when I went through my life review, I experienced all of the pain that I had given away from the interior of the people that I had given it to. But I also understood, and from my own interior point of view simultaneously, that it wasn't so much that God was above, taking notes or had an army of angels notating or videotaping me as I lived my life. The divine was me. That's how the whole experience happened. It was me. I wasn't separate from it. It was me experiencing this life. And 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 here's the thing about the whole person who has some mental illness, in according to our society, that produces a violent person, an abusive person. The DNA is unforgiving. There's broken DNA all over the place.
Do you want to interject just to not give people the wrong understanding of what you're saying, but not all people with mental illness?
Oh no, of course not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get
Absolutely
what
not.
you're
Yeah,
saying.
thank you.
We'll get to that piece later because I know there's been some traumatic events where that's been questioned and labeled, and so yes. So please continue. I just wanted to say
When
that.
I say mental illness, I mean maybe yes, I mean biologically based inability to empathize and uh, to objectify a person, for to manipulate the people outside of you for your own malicious ends. They're just people born that way.
Absolutely.
They didn't and from that's natural and normal. It's part of the DNA of the world. But for our society, that's a step outside. And we talk about that kind of situation as being dangerous to those people around them. The we just went through something in Maine, and you probably all know about it. And I'm not far; I'm 50 miles from this place, and one of the funerals is happening in my town. Um,
So to clarify, just for people, depending on when they hear this, we're talking about the mass shooting in Lewiston, Maine.
yes, the mass, right? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Um, was that his life plan? Was that their life plan?
Yeah.
So there's all these probabilities and factors involved in someone's life plan. This guy who's getting buried in our town, uh, he was a big-hearted guy. He did a lot for a lot of people. Was it his life plan to die now? When I saw my parents, I saw two tracks of my parents' lives when I was dead, one with me and one without me. And their deaths were different, but their ends were the same. They went back to the place of bliss. And so that even how they passed out of the world, these were two different things. So how a person passes out of the world, I've come back twice and I've chosen to come back twice. It's not like it's a locked in thing. There's all these other factors that are involved. It's my life plan and your life plan. One of the things that I saw on the other side that my little tiny brain here can't understand is the vast complexity of all of it. There are so many moving parts to it, and it doesn't just include what's going on in our personal lives or on the planet at this time. It involves the entire history of Earth and all of the things that have ever happened here in every corner of it. Not that there are corners on a round ball. The 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 complexity of that then multiplies out to the whole size of the universe. This is a much, much bigger picture than most people see. And so I tend not to ask, was this my life plan? Was this the life plan of these people? Because that's a very narrow thread. When people say, oh, that's the plan, we have plan A, and we go from A to B to C to D to E on plan A. And then we got plan B, and we go from A to B to C to D on plan B. And they're the plan. But that's not the way it is. It's more like this web behind you on the wall there. There's this, all these lines extending in all these directions. All of those are all the probabilities. And as for this guy, was it his life plan to, we don't know what was going on inside his head. But somewhere along the way, he made that into his plan because he made choices to make that so. And we do know that. So, but was it his soul plan?
Right. So maybe you can help dissect, was this his soul plan versus free will versus karma? Like, how do you define those terms? Because I think people who have had NDEs might describe those words differently than the people who have not had NDEs. And do you explain that?
Well, first of all, I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure that out.
Okay.
Because of the complexity of it is way I saw the size of this thing. I use language to communicate the best I can about everything that I talk about. I use metaphors, but I was just reading in the Gospel of John the other day, and Jesus is having this conversation, and he says to this guy, "You don't understand my after effects. How are you going to possibly understand what happened to me when I was there?" And we all have that problem. So I can't contain the knowledge that I had even for myself of it that I had over there. I can't even bring it to myself, let alone to anybody else. That said, um, as I aim at the oneness of being instead of at myself, the worries about my karma, my bad karma, my sinful nature, whatever you want to call it, I step aside of those things. And I step aside of those things because they're temporary. They're chains that I forged. I made a lot of free will choices in my life before I died. And I went through my hell experience, my life review. That was all about all the choices that I made. I made all these choices to hurt all these people. And but none of those were me. Those all accrued to me because of the choices that I made. The me that was really me, the soul me, I needed to turn to the light. I needed to listen to the love. And as soon as I did that, all of those just fell away. They just fell away. They were gone. They didn't exist anymore, dissolved, dematerialized.
So when
I,
you say that, Peter, like when we're thinking about the people in Lewiston and the ripple out effects to everyone that has been impacted by that, how do there's clearly anger and betrayal and trauma, and rightfully so, these emotions that several hundreds of people are having. How do you help them make sense of, like, we know, okay, on the other side, it's all light and all love, and how do you help them to be in their human experience of these emotions and also understand to like lean more towards the light, because that can feel very flip or frivolous to someone in that state of going through such a traumatic event. Can you offer them in that way?
Well, I have done that, not in this large of a tragedy, but in quite a number of tragedies in my previous role in my profession. I let people be who they are, where they are when they're there. And I be with them with their anger. I try not to convey, I don't feel that feeling. That's a ridiculous statement. I just try to be with them and help them mourn and grieve and talk it through if they want to talk to me about it, and or not tell them to foreshorten their grief. This is, I'm going to add that I spent quite a number of years on the domestic violence homicide review panel for the state of Maine, reviewing domestic violence murders with with all the details. And there were plenty of times I wanted, every single time, there was not a time that there wasn't, that I wanted the perpetrator locked up. I wanted them away, and I wanted the abused person to be safe. And in our case now, what happened, that the perpetrator is deceased. And now we're left with trying to move ahead with this healing. And I think there's going to be a lot of crying at this service. I think there's going to be anger. There's going to be, it's going to take a long time to work through all that stuff as an individual, but also as a state. I encourage people to feel what they're feeling when they're feeling it. And then to let them know, I don't push my NDE on folk. I never mention it unless it seems right to talk about it, the love and the everlasting nature of it. When I was a young pastor, my first big event, my senior pastor was somewhere, and there was a suicide in the church. A kid took his dad's car, totaled it, killed himself afterwards. I went to talk to the family, my first thing, and I was all about my love I was still living in the buzz of the divine place. And so with the whole family there, and everybody's crying, and there must have been a dozen people there, I said, it's okay. He's all right. You don't need to worry about him, which caused a lot of upset in the room. And the brother-in-law literally dragged me from the chair and hauled me out of the house, slammed the door. That was my lesson on how to let people be where they are. There is a thing about near-death experience. We do grieve. We feel pain. This has been a horrible week for everybody here. But I can't help knowing that it's okay on the other side either. So I keep my mouth shut a lot and let people do the talking and let them work through their pain.
And when they say to you, Peter, like when they are asking you, like, this is so much darkness, like, maybe they know your story. How is it really light on the other side? All I feel is darkness, pain. Where is God? Why would God let this happen? Why my child? Why my parent? How do you help them make sense of that?
I don't think there is making sense of that. I don't think that it's a sensible thing. I think that when they're ready to talk about it, which usually means after a period of healing space, when the rawness of the experience is far enough in the past that their questions are new, then I can talk to them about the structure of all that there is. This the thing about knowing one's eternal nature is one knows one can't be killed.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I one of my after effects is courage. I'm just I'm not foolhardy, but I just have a lot of courage because I know this body's expendable.
Mhm.
So how do you help someone who is so embodied that they can't see what they actually are? That's really the way I hear the question. And how do I help the person in their blindness to their original nature? I have to show it to them. Words are Hallmark cards, no offense to Hallmark. They're thin and weak,
Mhm.
and they can come across as platitudes. So when someone asks me about it, I
Mhm.
can talk about some of the things that happened in my NDE, that I saw the divine being inside of all there is. I saw the return to the fullness of being of everything, that everything made folds back into the divine. But I can't convince anybody of that.
Got it. So when I think about, I think you described as the purgatory fire that you kind of went through when you had harmed others, and that being quote unquote your hell. But then I've recently seen After Death in the movies. If you haven't
Oh, yeah.
yet, go see it. But there are people that are familiar with is it Howard Storm?
Howard Storm, I know Howard a little bit.
Yeah, and so, but he really describes a treacherous hell on the
Yes.
other side. Um, and not just a purgatory of fire, that he was in hell and was like getting eaten alive. And, you know, I guess,
Pretty frightening.
yeah, it's pretty frightening. I mean, I
But
don't,
then what happened next?
well, I think, went through a lot more suffering. His family left him. I
But
feel
no,
like,
no, what happened next in his story is he turned to the light and all of that went away.
yes, it did. But then he came back into the life, and then he still received these consequences of,
Oh, well, yeah.
and his children kind of saying, I don't want anything to do with you. And so there was consequences for whatever the behavior was previous to the NDE, is my
Yep.
understanding.
Of course.
Um,
Even though he was changed,
yeah.
he still had to pay the price. There's consequences in the world. If you're talking about karma, there's consequences in the world.
Okay. And so, I mean, what would one expect for somebody who is, committing homicides or mass shootings or engaging in domestic violence? I mean, how
So
do
why do people want to judge other people?
Mhm,
I wasn't judged. I judged myself.
mhm.
And I,
I'm
I
not
that,
saying it from a place of judgment. I'm saying it from a place of, where you have these family members in Maine and all over
but
the world. But
but it is judgment.
but yes, to some.
It's understandable. I'm not saying it's not understandable. That's the same reason. It's the same. It's a very similar to reason why I was very pleased when all of these domestic murderers were locked up for life.
Mhm. But there's also this immense confusion, like with the judgment. I think sometimes there is this, we don't have the clarity, a lot of us, of being on the other side. So it's just this massive confusion of how would someone do this? Why would
Oh,
someone?
I know.
So I think sometimes the judgment is coming from just like a complete lack of understanding. They don't know this person. They don't know their soul plan. They don't know the things they've been through in their life, their traumatic events. So yes, there's judgment, but I think that's birthed out of this confusion.
Oh, I'm not talking about the judgment of here and now. I'm talking about the judgment of condemning them to hell.
I see. Okay.
I the we're not going to be able to see inside this guy's mind. And from my point of view, it's better that he took his own life than then the whole state had to go through a trial, and all the rest of that goes along with that, rubbing the wound stuff. What I was talking about is what happens to him after he dies. It's like the Hitler question. What happened to Hitler? All I know is that the divine love was a wave of love so immense that it was irresistible to me. And that all I needed to do was to turn toward it, which is what happened to Howard Storm and other people who've been in hell, who've been there maybe long enough. NDEers. I mean, there are NDEers who go through hell that come back. Maybe they weren't there long enough. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity to see the light. I'm spending my life now looking for the light so that next time I go through the fiery sword, I'm going to be able to see quickly and clearly. But it's not up to me where anybody else goes. The whole why did they do it, and I would definitely, I'd be definitely, if this guy had survived, I would want justice. And that's for sure, for the families, for everybody else. We're not going to know what happened inside his head. We don't know what happens inside any of these people's heads.
Yeah. You said something very interesting, which I hadn't really thought about, where you said he was going through this hell, and maybe some people who go through that experience of hell don't have enough time to actually see the light. I didn't realize, it just never occurred to me, actually, that they would go through a hell, not have enough time in an NDE to see the light, and then are placed back here. Because, gosh, what a different outcome that would have, returning to life.
And so then if the divine is so compassionate that the divine gives us all what we need when we need it, in terms of the NDE, we each get our individual experience, we come back, and then we live our lives through it. What impact does having only gone to hell have on a person's life? I bet it's pretty extreme.
Yeah, I would imagine it's pretty intense either way. So,
yep.
And you had said, when we were talking about the pre-birth plan, kind of, I can't remember your specific words exactly, but it was like, well, you kind of had said, well, we're a part of God, so it wasn't like our plan. What can you say a little more?
So in the core of my being, and I'm not saying this because I've read this. This is why this is the reason I live my life. I've lived my life the way I live it, is because at the very center of my being, at the core of who I am, this is the divine light itself. And the divine light itself loves itself. It is love itself, and nothing is lost to itself. It is all things, and it all gets folded back into the love itself. And so this is a very reorienting experience, where even in one's enemy's eyes, one can see the light that's hiding deep inside. And so it becomes very difficult. I've stood up to plenty of bullies in my life, large and small. What I mean is powerful and less powerful. Never once did I hate them, because I could always see the light inside them. Not because I was like poking around to see it. It's because it's self-evident. I see the core of the being of light and love inside of everything. And so that colors everything I say and do. And so
can you give me an example of maybe one of the most powerful or aggressive bullies that you've dealt with? Maybe describing the things that they've done that have been harmful, and then at the same time, the light that you could also see.
I give you a short and a longer. And the short one is, I worked a lot with domestic violence. I helped quite a number of people escape violent situations. And there was a particular time in my town where there was a woman who was in a domestic situation. He had threatened her, and she didn't want him to go to jail. So I went to the house and I asked him for all his guns. maybe 10 or 15 guns. And he was a foot and a half taller than me, twice as wide, super power weightlifter, black belt in jujitsu. He could have snapped me in two with his hands. And although he dominated me, I can still see him in the kitchen. He's kind of up over me and threatening me. I'll give you my guns. And he's screaming at me. And I was like, hey, man, if you don't give me the guns, I'm going to go to the cops. And I'm giving you an opportunity here to let her go so that we can do this in a way that she gets free and you don't kill her. And that's what happened. Then she left the state, and there she's remarried. All's well. I know it sounds crazy, but I wasn't afraid of him. He could have broken me in two.
What was the light that you saw?
It's I don't know how to describe it except for I see the light inside of him. There's like this core of radiance that exists in the chests of all people, and it shines right out their eyes. And a way to describe it is, if you're ever with someone who dies and you watch them die, the light goes out of the eyes. And it's the opposite of that. It's the light is more strongly in their eyes. This other time, there was a big embezzlement in the church that I was serving. It was possibly decades old. There was possibly a first tier of embezzlers or money mismanagers who were definitely protecting the second embezzler. And those people who were in charge of the church, and this was statewide news, they threatened me in my life and my career, not my physical life, but my career, my finances, my social standing, my profession. They wanted to defrock me because I was pushing too many buttons trying to find out what was going on. And so as they continued to threaten me and my well-being, I never hated him. I couldn't hate him. And it was pretty strong. Made the statewide news, hit the Globe, Boston Globe. It's not, it's more like humility, Liz. I'm trying to figure out how to say it. It's like,
I just am trying to like think about it from the perspective of, the majority of the world when they're facing these people that are, threatening them in whatever way. I mean, how do we?
I'm not against defense, by the way. I'm not against defense. I totally defended myself against these people. And we did kind of a battle, and they lost and I won. So I wasn't going to milk toast over. And I think that when you're looking at somebody and there's this violence coming at you, save yourself first. Don't go looking for the light. Get out of the way if you can.
Sure, absolutely 100% protect yourself if you're in a threatening position. But when the threat ends, hopefully if it does for people, how do we start to train ourselves if that we don't feel that natural gift to see the light in others? I mean, certainly I can see it in a lot of people, but there are eyes that I have looked into that are dark. I mean, really dark. And so when I'm faced with that, how do I help myself to see the light that I'm just not seeing?
Well, I want to say that me too. I've definitely seen dark-eyed people. I've felt them from feet away.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, as deep as they bury the light inside themselves, I can still see it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we train ourselves? The traditional way is to get out of the way. The only thing that stands between us and seeing the light in others is us seeing the light inside ourselves. And how do you do that? You step aside again and again and again.
And so if you can be a little more specific when you say step aside again and again, are you just saying love from a distance, or what are you?
Well, depends on, I mean, and if we're talking about a practical situation or where a person has left a domestic violence situation and they're trying to protect themselves, definitely love from a distance. Don't go anywhere near the person. Be as safe as you possibly can. And if you need to use your anger as a tool for self-defense, do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't begin to find a softening inside your own heart for your own self That person doesn't have to be, you don't have to go try to find the light inside of that person. The the practices that come down through the centuries around the world and all these different traditions involve breath and mental focus. And this breath and this mental focus can be, you can have with words, you can use a chant, or you can use your body. It's always good to have a third leg on that stool of breath and mental focus. And the process is to aim not at yourself, to control your mind, to quiet the chattering monkey mind, as they call it, to quiet down that mind. And the process of quieting down that mind reveals the light itself. And it can come as a sense of peace. It can come as a sense of silence. It can come as a sense of darkness, but it often comes with a sense of calmness, even if it's only the moment that you're in that space. And then the accumulation of 10,000 times visiting that space creates a much larger cavern for the presence of the divine to dwell. And as it dwells inside, the light inside is more naturally seen, and so it's more naturally seen on the outside, because this divine light sees itself. And so the more I grow the space inside of me, the easier it is for me to see it outside of me. But again, that doesn't mean that I travel the world undefended or allow people to use me as a doormat. That is not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, because I think sometimes there are people who, myself included, at different phases of my life, like we can't see the light in ourselves. So if we cannot see our own light, then how will we ever see the light in somebody else?
Exactly.
So
And if you go in nature and you're calm in nature and you feel that power that's there, that's the light. That's the same light that's inside of you. And so get out, and the easiest way is to get out into nature as often as you can and spend a little time. Instead of making a lot of noise, spend some time listening to what's going on around you. The ocean's crash, the bird song, the trickle of the river, the wind in the trees, whatever it is, just be where you are and feel that peace that comes with that. That peace that comes with that is because it is the light itself. And the more you bathe in that, the easier it is to see it, to feel it inside yourself. So many people who pursue meditative life or a spiritual practice, let's call it a spiritual practice because there's lots of different forms, um, they have had some kind of experience or intuition, a sensing that there's something more. They've had an experience when they were a kid, or there's been this whole line of synchronicities. But I'm not just talking about those kind of things, synchronicities. I'm talking about experiences where you can't explain how your dad showed up in your bedroom and you know he's dead, that kind of thing. Or you're with somebody who's dying and suddenly you see the people who've come to collect him. There are major events that happen in people's lives that are doorways into heaven. And if you've had a doorway into heaven like that, you have a doorway into heaven. And if that can become part of the aim of your interior life, to focus on the feeling that you had when you're there, you can cultivate that experience into a larger doorway. And the bigger the doorway that you create, the easier it is to find the light and inside yourself. So I want to differentiate loving self and loving self. So, I spent much of my life mad at my choice. So I was not in love with me, Peter. I was pretty angry at Peter for what I had chosen to do. But Peter's not me. All the while, I continued to cultivate my space inside myself. And I find that being in, people call it chi or prana or Holy Spirit or radiant energy. There's lots of different names for this feeling that is experientially vibrant. The more time I spend inside of that space, the more I love myself. The more I love myself, the more I see myself as light. But it's not my physical self. That's a side effect of this. That's not the primary purpose. Oh, that's not the primary action. It's a secondary action. So, and meditating in groups, because the energy multiplies itself.
Absolutely. I mean, there's certainly a ripple out effect. And as you were talking about kind of seeing the light in other people and, you know, protecting ourselves and defending ourselves, I wonder what the challenge is for people who are really leaning into the light. And is there a danger in wanting to see the light in somebody else that is manipulating that individual? And
Oh, yeah.
how do you draw that line or help people understand, defend and protect yourself first, but also be the light and see the light? Like, how do you help them to differentiate?
So when I say I see the light inside my enemies, that doesn't mean I'm trying to give them a hug.
Mhm.
It means that I see their origin and I don't judge their action and condemn them to hell for what they're doing to me.
Okay.
But that doesn't also mean that I don't protect myself. It means that I do protect myself. It means that even though I see the light inside them, and perhaps even if it's a situation where I need to forgive them, that doesn't mean that I forget. That doesn't mean that I go back into their sphere of influence at all. And if someone's trying to manipulate me, as soon as I figure that out, I still see the light in them, but I don't have to hang out with them. I don't have to be around them. It's not milk toast we're talking about.
And
We're
that
talking,
does make you less of the light.
oh,
Yeah.
no, no, not at all, because they're as temporary as I am here. I'm I'm not less of light by anything. I'm because I am not physical at all. I live in this thing. I am this light. I am this light, and so are you.
Mhm.
And so it's not going to diminish by my protecting myself by keeping a distance from them, even if they say, "Oh, I love you, come back to me." Yeah, well, guess what? You hurt me, you hurt me. Yeah, I'm not going back. I'll love you from the West Coast. Um, but don't ever, step across my threshold again. Um, that's an entirely different thing. So you can love, Jesus says, love your enemy as yourself. That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about um, going into your enemy's camp and sacrificing yourself so that they can do you in. He's talking about finding this love inside yourself and loving them even while they are your enemy.
Mhm.
Not just try to make them your friend, but love your enemies.
Mhm. I get that. Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll end on me asking you, having had your NDEs and the experiences that you've had and the wisdom you've gained from your own experience, and then being in the community of others who've had similar experiences, what do you think is the most important thing that you took away, or most important thing for us to know?
Love as best you can wherever you are. Love yourself as best you can. Protect yourself. Love those around you. And know that in the end, it all works out. That death is just the beginning of the
Mhm.
next stage. And you might not believe that, but you'll find out for yourself. I'm confident.
Sure.
So be a little chill.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter. I really do um, appreciate just the time that not only you've taken with me, but with everyone that you share your message with. I think it's so important. I'm so grateful that you're here to share it.
Thanks for having me, Lizzie.
Yeah. All right. Take care, Peter.
Peace.